Facebook post. But Kelly did come to the rescue. So, and in honor of Todd Brittingham tonight, I want to point out my Macintosh and iPhone and every other Apple product we have here. So, thank you again for inviting me. As Jeremy mentioned, my name's Allan Daniels. I'm with Dr. Daniels and Son in Bloomfield Hills. I started with my dad in 1988, and we buy land contracts and invest and loan money on real estate. Licenses I hold, I'm a licensed real estate broker, mortgage loan originator, and our company is a mortgage broker, lender, and servicer. I was appointed in 1988 to the Michigan Mortgage Industry Advisory Board by the Commissioner of the Office of Financial and Insurance Regulation. I was reappointed in 2012, and for the past 3 years I've chaired that board. Over the last 20 plus years, I've had the pleasure and displeasure of spending time in Lansing and Washington. I've testified at the House banking and Senate banking, even during this lame duck when they were doing the right to work protest, which was interesting because the Democrats wouldn't vote at all. The Republicans had to call a recess to get more Republicans in to vote for bills that ended up passing unanimously in the full House. So it's just crazy. And as my wife Kelly, who's here, remembers, in Washington, D.C., I got yelled at by Barney Frank. So, thank you. I didn't feel so good at the time because one of the lobbyists said, Allan, you know better than to get in a debate with the man holding the microphone and expect to get the last word. I prepared a slide presentation. If people want to, feel free to interrupt at any time. Please don't exercise your Second Amendment rights by pulling out arms, but don't kill the messenger, in other words. But some of this is not pretty. For most of my career, things were sort of common sense based, and I think most of you have been to a district court where you might be in a landlord-tenant or a land contract forfeiture situation where the tenant or the vendee will bring out some sort of excuse why they didn't pay. Maybe it would be that the land contract or the lease was written on yellow paper instead of white paper with black ink, and the judge would usually say, well, maybe not 36th District Court, but usually they would say, did you pay anything? Where's the money? And usually it would come down to a pragmatic approach. As evidenced by the robo-signing billion-dollar settlement, where none of those borrowers were proven to be in default, it was all technicalities. And the world has changed. And if you haven't known it already, you'll see it tonight. Title of the presentation is Hardcore Regulations. I figured if people Google hardcore and come here tonight, it'd be sort of funny. Standard disclaimer, I'm not an attorney. Information provided is not legal advice. You want to check with your own counsel to check on all this. And then it's probably just made up, so don't pay any attention to it anyway. Open the doors. Who has sold a home to a consumer on a land contract? Has anyone made a hard money loan or any type of loan at all to a consumer? Do you think there's consumer demand for that type of financing and loans? If there's great demand, why would one exit this market as I have? You can answer it with two four-letter words beginning with SAFE and CFPB. CFPB stands for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Someone would have asked me in 1984 to 1988 when I attended the University of Michigan, a liberal haven in itself, if they would describe an entity without naming it that had a director and the powers to direct the economy, I would have thought they were talking about the evil empire of the Soviet Union. Where are we now? We'll do a little bit of review. We'll talk about Michigan laws and rules, federal laws and regulations. We'll talk about what's the same, what's changed, and what will happen. Major laws we'll be talking about, and the regulator. I like that graphic. Real estate license law, Article 25 of the Occupational Code. regulated by Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. They go by MLOLA, believe it or not. Mortgage Broker Lender Servicers Licensing Act, known as the First Mortgage Act, regulated by Michigan Office of Financial and Insurance Regulation. The SAFE Act, Secure and Fair Enforcement Mortgage Licensing Act, a federal law originally regulated by Department of Housing and Urban Development. Power under Dodd-Frank transferred SAFE Act regulation to Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. MLOLA, the Michigan version of the SAFE Act, Michigan Loan Officer Licensing Act, also regulated by Michigan Office of Financial and Insurance Regulation. And Dodd-Frank, which is 2,000 pages, about 1,000 of which deal with mortgages and vicariously real estate. I won't say I read all of it, but I know I read more than anybody that voted on it. Brief history lesson. Pre-1987 Michigan, which 1987 was the passage of the First Mortgage Act, you had Michigan usury laws, which would have regulated lending both on a private and regulated lender basis. You had civil usury, of which the penalty is forfeiture of all interest or finance charge, and then criminal usury, which is forfeiture of your freedom or penalty for it. Equitable mortgage doctrine, which came about from case law, Michigan Court of Appeals, Michigan Supreme Court, case law dealing with form versus substance. In other words, common type thing, one slide too many, but common equitable mortgage example is someone buying a house from a distressed consumer, gets the deed to the house, pays off the bank as part of that transaction, simultaneously or after a slight delay perhaps sells the property back on a land contract to that former owner. Most people would argue that that's not a loan, it's a deed and then a land contract, so it's two sales. The courts have ruled form versus substance, really dissecting in the term equitable mortgage, meaning in the eyes of equity, in the eyes of fairness, it's a loan. Now, where does that come through? Most of those are sold at a pretty big markup back to the consumer. That's termed a finance charge, which puts it into usury. It also is subject, if it's a loan, it's a credit transaction, makes it subject to truth in lending, rescission, refund of finance charge. Federal law is truth in lending. If you're a creditor, words of caution on creditor, if you do a series of transactions in a 12-month period, you're defined as a creditor under truth in lending. However, one high cost transaction defines you as a creditor. High cost is not very high. You look at the average prime offered rate, which is about 3.5 right now. If you're a few points over that, it's a high cost transaction. Article 25, Michigan Occupational Code, deals with real estate license law. All this is pre-1987 stuff here, and then it went on steroids after that. Article 25, just a short review. Some of you guys may be, guys and gals, may be real estate brokers and salespeople. A lot of people don't realize that in the definition of real estate broker, it contains the word mortgage. So even prior to 1987, if you were putting a mortgage deal together, putting the parties together, you need to be licensed as a real estate broker. And even after 1987, if you're dealing with something that's other than 1 to 4 family, commercial, 5+ family, vacant land, you're subject to the real estate broker occupational code regulation. Same word as in real estate salesperson definition. Usually you got regulations that are the legislative body, whether it be Congress in Washington or the legislature here in Lansing, will pass the law, and then the bureaucratic people have the opportunity to write rules that implement it. The rules have the same effect as law. Sometimes there's public hearings. Sometimes you have the ability to write unanonymous comments that are posted on the internet. So be careful and censor yourself because they're there forever. But there are some rules under Article 25 dealing with investors or unlicensed, well, theoretically unlicensed people that are engaging in the sale of real estate, and the number of transactions that put them over a threshold where licensure is required. Many of you would be aware of this, but if you're, unless you engage the services of a real estate broker, if you engage in more than 5 real estate sales in any 12-month period, now it doesn't say a year or calendar year, it says any 12-month period, that would be rolling. then you need to be licensed. Now, there is a carve-out that if you use the services of a licensee, you're okay. But the word is a little bit, you've got to look into the gray areas of this. Engaging in more than 5 real estate sales. Some people say, well, I can be the seller. Or if you're engaging in the sale, the buyer's engaged in it too. So some people say you can buy as many as you want. Just read it yourself, talk to your own counsel. I would read it sort of that it's, if you're engaged in the sale, you could be the buyer. Holding oneself out to the public is being principally engaged in the sale of real estate. I've seen a lot of business cards that people hear and they use the word, you know, they would imply that you do real estate, and holding yourself out to the public could trigger licensure. There are penalties, including jail time, for unlicensed activity. Devoting over 50% of one's working time or more than 15 hours per week in any 6-month period to the sale of real estate. Now, so far I don't know if anybody has a chip implanted in you like the puppies to know where you are and how many hours you're spending, but it is written in the rules. Fast forward to 1987, and you've got the passage of the Mortgage Brokers, Lenders, Servicers Licensing Act, which was Act 173 of 1987. It's really a consequence of some of the 1980s Michigan scandals. Does anyone here remember Diamond Mortgage and A.J. Obey? George Hamilton with the tan on TV talking about A.J. Obey, and it's backed by real estate collateral. Well, the promotion was for widows and orphans to invest their retirement funds in A.J. Obey, and then they funded private mortgages made by Diamond Mortgage and gave a pretty good return to the A.J. Obey investors. It became so popular that they didn't have enough product, and Diamond Mortgage sold the same mortgage to multiple investors. And that can become a problem. The president of Diamond Mortgage ended up spending some vacation time at Jackson Prison. And every time he came up for parole, Attorney General Frank Kelly showed up to say, don't let him out. Now, Salem Mortgage was also around in that time, and they didn't like the Michigan usury cap of 11% when the prime rate was 22. And I didn't like it either, but I was, in middle school. So their ideas was to circumvent the usury laws by using a carve-out. There's an exception for business purpose transactions where loans made between corporations for business purposes, the usury limit is higher. So the idea was to turn a consumer and have them file corporation papers. And again, you're running into this form versus substance type thing. So again, incorporating consumers equals the Attorney General. And we talked about equitable mortgage a little bit, the purchase sale with buyback. So again, all this led to more laws being passed and regulation. Some of the language is pretty eloquent, talking about equitable mortgage doctrine. This is from a 1970s case, Court of Appeals. It is well settled that a court of equity can declare a deed absolute on its face to be a mortgage. Talks about the precedent, 1970. You look back to 1958, equitable mortgage, one of the earliest cases, although they do go back to the 40s. Michigan Supreme Court, read this language, talk about the way they crafted language then. Suffice to say that its purpose is to protect the necessitous borrower from an extortion. In the accomplishment of this purpose, a court must look squarely at the real nature of the transaction, thus avoiding, so far as lies its power, the betrayal of justice by the cloak of words, the contrivances of form, or the paper tigers of the crafty. We are interested not in form or color, but in nature and substance. They wrote pretty well back then. And, so if you're still doing this type thing, and it happens every day, people call me about it, and I tell them there's court precedent, their attorney should look it up, and they question me, it's there. 1987 First Mortgage Act. Mortgage loan definition, we're question and answer period. We've got mortgage loan means a loan secured by a first mortgage on real property located in the state and used or improved for use as a dwelling and designed for occupancy by 4 or fewer families. And you can say, I'm talking about seller financing here, I'm not worried about it. Or a land contract covering real property located in this state, used or improved for use as a dwelling and designed for occupancy by 4 or fewer families. If you're selling 1 to 4 family properties on land contract. It's called a mortgage loan since 1987. That's almost 28 years. I'm sorry, almost 26 years. I'm in the numbers business too. So it's there. Now there are some exceptions to it, but it's in there, and many people are not aware of it. However, I haven't run across too many cases where ignorance, whether it's speeding tickets or whichever, where ignorance is going to be a valid defense. The other thing to look at is the licensee definition under the First Mortgage Act. The people writing the laws, many of them have been lawyers or are lawyers. Some of them might be disbarred lawyers soon if you look at the Supreme Court Justice news from yesterday. But the licensee definition, here's the quiz. Can someone, any volunteer to define licensee, whether it's a driver's licensee or in this case a first mortgage licensee? I'm going to volunteer someone if nobody raised their hand. Jeremy.
Thank you. Honest, I have no idea how it was.
All right, I'll ask, I got a shill in here. Kelly? No. Kelly? All right, the definition, nobody raised their hand. A licensee under most law means a person's licensed under the Act. And so you would say, okay, this law applies to me if I'm licensed under the Act. Well, I'm not licensed, I'm under the radar screen. Well, they got that one covered. There's something else in there. A licensee is a person who is licensed or required to be licensed under the Act. So if you should have been licensed but you weren't, the state still has the authority to come in your business unannounced, audit your books, examine your books and records, and cite you for violations, fine you, and possibly jail you or ban you from the business. You're not shooting me yet, huh? There are a couple exceptions. The Act does not apply to any of the following. A mortgage lender that in the aggregate with any affiliates makes 10 or fewer mortgage loans, and that would include land contracts, in a 12-month period from January 1 to December 31st. So if you were doing, prior to the SAFE Act, if you were doing less than 10 land contracts or mortgage loans a year, you could be exempted. A mortgage servicer that holds 10 or fewer mortgage loans or land contracts in a 12-month period. Now again, if you sold 5 last year, 7 this year, you got 12, you got to be a licensed servicer. Or a mortgage servicer that it together in the aggregate with its affiliates services only 75 or fewer land contracts that do not have escrows for taxes and insurance. So again, this is 1987 law. Unfortunately, there's layers of laws on top of this. Now, things to remember, bullet points. Mortgage loan does include land contracts under the First Mortgage Act. And then section 2-1, or parenthetic 1, license required unless you're acting as an employee or a licensed loan officer for only one licensee. So if you become licensed as a loan officer, you don't need the broker's license. You can work for that person with just a loan officer license. And then if you're exempt under section 25, which is the exemption for a lender making 10 or fewer mortgage loans, which include land contracts, in the aggregate with any affiliates. In other states, people are able to avoid licensure by forming multiple entities. Michigan, since 1987, has had language which effectively bans that. You cannot form another LLC, have your wife, your son, your daughter, brother-in-law, anything. They do define control person. It's a very wide definition. So the 10 is in the aggregate with any affiliates. And so that loophole is closed in this state. It's not in others if you feel like moving. I went to a seminar once in the 1980s, and people started saying, it was given by a Southern gentleman, and people said, well, you can't do that where I live. And he said, you ain't no tree, move. SAFE Act. SAFE Act came as a result of the housing bubble. It was perceived that there were rogue loan officers that maybe came up on their laser printer with W-2s, and there were appraisals done that might not have been, it may have been, something called Photoshop? Things happened. Thing being a 4-letter word starting with S and ending with T. So you had the SAFE Act passed. It required background checks, education, testing of loan officers. They came up with the term loan originator. A seller selling property and providing seller financing can be termed a loan. It can be a loan originator, and that transaction is subject to the SAFE Act. SAFE Act mandated that all the 50 states and all the territories come up with their own loan officer license law. Michigan's version of the SAFE Act is MLOLA, Michigan Loan Officer Licensing Act, which is Act 75 of 2009. The deadline for a state to enact their law or for the effective date was 7/31/10, and Michigan waited till the last minute, and that's when it became effective. It was passed in 2009. And the reason for that window period between passage and effective date was to get all the existing loan officers licensed and anybody new, which required people that had been in the business, such as yours truly, for a very, very long time with clean records, to go take a 20-hour class that they could have taught, take a test. So it could have been just called the Testing Service Profitability Act of 2009. Simultaneously with the effective date of the Act, the Office of Financial and Insurance Regulation, many of you have seen these, the frequently asked questions dealing with the SAFE Act. And the biggest question, the most highlighted question was, is a land contract defined as a residential mortgage loan under the Michigan Loan Officer Licensing Act and, under the SAFE Act, the Michigan SAFE. And at the time, OFER, with a lot of lobbying pressure coming from a lot of powerful groups, came out with frequently asked questions saying, and I quote, subject to subsequent HUD final rule, OFER did not, and it said does at the time, but did not now, consider a land contract to be included in the definition of residential mortgage loan. They went on to say that a purchase money mortgage was considered, and then they also mentioned that land contracts are specifically covered in the Mortgage Broker Lender Servicers Licensing Act, and unless otherwise exempt, dealing with the 10, licensure or registration is required. So those were the FAQs that came up 7/31/10. Now, the bad news here is that the following year in 2011, June 29th to be exact, HUD did come out with the final rule, and that sort of turned things a little different. Then came the HUD rule, and things got turned upside down. The HUD rule states that residential mortgage loans includes an installment sales contract, or they also use the term contract for deed. They don't say land contract, but it's the same thing. The reasoning they give, and it's about a 150-page rule, counting the footnotes. I did read that one. It says, because the SAFE Act uses a definition of mortgage that's also used in the Truth in Lending Act, and it's mortgage, deed of trust, or other equivalent consensual security interest. So the highlighted yellow term is a land contract for deed. The theory is that it serves the same effect. If you look at how some of the Western states operate, that operate under title theory of mortgage law rather than lien theory, which is in use in Michigan and most of the Midwest and Eastern states. If you've ever done business in a Western state, the deed is actually held by an escrow agent, and they call it a deed of trust. And just because the deed is still held by the land contract vendor, in HUD's opinion, and I think it's right thinking, is that the buyer has equitable title, and it's no different. In fact, Michigan Association of Realtors admitted that while they were lobbying OFER for the frequently asked questions determination, which came out favorably, they were arguing with the IRS for the buyer to have the ability to deduct the interest, saying that they were the same as a buyer under a mortgage or a borrower under a mortgage. So there's a tightrope, but I don't think anyone could really effectively argue that HUD's theory was flawed. So as we just mentioned, the HUD SAFE Act rule nullified the OFER frequently asked questions regarding land contracts. HUD, or OFER did put out that it said until final determination is made by HUD, it was OFER's opinion. HUD did come out with the final rule. It nullified the FAQs. Beginning of 2011, middle of the night, I'm checking the internet. I'm sorry, end of 2011. I'm checking the internet, and the FAQs are gone off the OFER website. So we had our Mortgage Industry Advisory Board meeting November 2011, and I asked the Director of Licensing about the FAQs, and I said, you guys were just cleaning up your website. It was an IT glitch, wasn't it? And he said, you know better than that, Allan. And I said, well, don't you think it would be helpful to have some new FAQs up there, at least an announcement saying these FAQs are gone? And in response to the question about new FAQs, he said, you want to make a recommendation, we'll look at it. Well, we didn't want to give them a blank sheet of paper and say, here, fill it in, because that's not the best way to do business. So right now, the FAQs are gone. We'll go into later what may come up later, but there's other dynamics going on with the Dodd-Frank Act that the SAFE Act isn't really the biggest bully in town anymore. So, but if you're still relying on the old FAQs, and a lot of people still have them in their files and think that they're bulletproof, they're gone. It's evaporated. So, just because you still see them or you printed out a copy, it's not the law of the land, unfortunately. Okay, so within the HUD SAFE Act rule, and if you read the 150 pages, whichever, you're going to look for guidance, and you're going to find a lot of things in there, but the stuff you're looking for isn't there. You're going to find a department that effectively punted. HUD states, they're saying if land contracts were not considered a residential mortgage loan, now they are. Well, how many can you do? What's the standard? The 1987 rule said 10. Well, HUD states that an individual must meet a requisite degree of habitualness within a commercial context, meaning for profit, well, we're here to make money, to be engaged in the business of loan originator. But HUD says that they lack the congressional authority to establish a number, the Latin term de minimis. So effectively, HUD punted. Now, who did they punt to? Who's calling the fair catch? Who's going to return the punt? Well, one would think that if HUD says that Congress did not give them the authority, that constitutionally that the authority would rest with the states. So many of the states have taken it upon themselves to establish a de minimis or to define the standard of habitualness and what is a commercial context for the state. You've got states ranging from 0, meaning the first transaction you need to be licensed, to Mississippi, if they're considered a state, which is at 10. Now, I don't think Michigan is going to be Mississippi. They already went out on a limb probably and said that a land contract was not a residential mortgage loan and got overruled. Most states, Indiana's at 5, New York's at 3. Most states are between 3 and 5 with regard to the SAFE Act. Now, Michigan has not come out yet. You can talk to your own lawyers. There may be some new FAQs coming out in 2013. But as we move along, you'll also look at the Dodd-Frank Act and wonder if it really matters anymore. The comment section of the HUD rule refers back to triggers of commercial context, habitualness, and repetitiveness. Number 1, in a commercial context. 2, with some degree of habitualness or repetition, or represents to the public. There's that word again, business card, website, something that in a newspaper ad that you're offering seller financing through advertising or other means of communicating, or providing information that such individual can or will perform the activities. So if you're advertising that you offer land contracts and it's not your personal residence, I think you fit the definition of the rule, unfortunately. The rule does clarify that a person selling his or her own residence is not engaged in the business of loan originator. The state of Michigan felt that your primary residence was the only thing exempt. HUD did widen that, it said primary residence or vacation home. Now, there are definitions of vacation homes in the federal statutes, primarily in the commentary to truth in lending. So don't feel that you could move in your rental property for one day, call it a vacation home. Yes?
I just want to make sure I understood what you said there. if a person were to put in a Craigslist ad, land contract available, they could then take themselves to zero regarding the vagueness of the 1 to 10 or 5 to 10 or 3 or whatever. They could set themselves to zero simply by making that offer.
Theoretically, I mean, under the HUD rule, which, you know, and again, the states are, at this point, are free to interpret the HUD rule, and some of them have actually amended their laws or gone through the rule-making process to come up with definitions. In Michigan, the Administrative Procedures Act, which is the rule-making procedure, is a very, very long process, and there are no rules to the First Mortgage Act for that reason. There's no rules to MLOLA for that reason. So the quickest way out is frequently asked questions. They don't have the force of law, but it's guidance that'll at least give you some protection if the regulator says something. Unfortunately, those frequently asked questions don't exist right now. So if you're looking at other states, there are some states that are at zero, and if you were really conservative, you could say if this is a non-owner occupied property and I never lived there, I didn't inherit it, I may fit the definition of loan originator. Now, if you were to ask me my personal opinion as a non-lawyer, I would think that there are circumstances that someone would not fit the definition of loan originator. A couple examples. Let's say you're a retiring landlord, or your landlord got in a car accident, you went into a coma, and you're liquidating your rental properties, and you've got 9 of them. 2 of them the tenants want to buy on land contract. The rest of them they could qualify for a mortgage, or you sold them to unrelated parties. You have no history in prior years of seller financing properties, and you don't after that. Are you?
Kind of a
I think you could make an argument you're not. Another example, there's an urban example. I got a rural one too, and these were mentioned in Lansing. You're a farmer, and price of commodities are high, so there's a couple 100-acre parcels for sale, and you go buy them. There's houses on those properties that you don't want. So you go to the township and you cut off 3 acres in the house and you sell that to a family on land contract. You do 2 of them in 1 year. You haven't bought a whole lot of new farmland recently. Are you a loan originator? I don't think you are. If you're investing in real estate and you put an ad on Craigslist, you've got to look yourself in the mirror. The way there's ethics questions in a lot of these exams, and the best explanation I ever heard to someone about ethics, because someone say, how can you teach ethics? Well, the way I teach ethics is, how are you going to feel when Mike Wallace, may he rest in peace, brings that microphone and you're on 60 Minutes? So do the 60 Minutes test. If you feel you can put that ad on Craigslist and defend yourself, not in the court of law, but on 60 Minutes, then go ahead and do it. But I think you've got to look at that as a worst case. Now, again, we're talking SAFE Act, and Dodd-Frank is a whole nother ball of wax. Any other question? Yeah.
I know this sounds ridiculous, but if there's no FAQ and there's really no defined de minimis, are there any limits?
Well, you've certainly got the 10 limit, and that's been the law of the land since 1987.
Okay.
So that's there. I can tell you that, and I was at the meeting, I arranged the meeting, there were some frequently asked questions that you might know that were submitted to OFER. The Office of General Counsel of OFER and the rest of the deputy commissioners and senior deputy commissioners and up to the commissioners are reviewing that, and maybe they'll come out with something. The working group that put those together, I did a rough draft, and other people on the working group included people pretty high up in the Michigan Association of Realtors, Michigan Mortgage Lenders Association, and then the Mortgage Industry Advisory Board. There's a conference room table full in Lansing. One would think that it'd be pretty simple if they took the number 10 from one law that's been the law of the land for a long time and put that on the frequently asked questions. Unfortunately, if that were going to happen, it probably would have happened already. So I don't think 10 is going to be the limit. I think most of the states, if you looked at the 50 of them, there's Mississippi at 10. There's another 49 that ain't at 10. Most of them are 3 to 5. There's a few at 0. you're going to see further on that I don't think going beyond 3 is really safe. Yeah.
Is Michigan the only state that hasn't come up with the guidelines?
Is Michigan the
Michigan's
only state that hasn't? No, I don't think. I don't. The list I saw, which I don't think is a public list, probably had less than 25 states on them that have come up with a number. The rest of them, are sort of waiting, letting the courts decide, or are just relying on Dodd-Frank, or maybe there isn't a lot of seller financing going on. Believe it or not, in Pennsylvania, they wanted to relax the law, and the mortgage originators, the brokers and the bankers association, fought it because they thought there'd be more competition. Now, we're not seeing that. Michigan Mortgage Lenders Association was right at that meeting, shoulder to shoulder, with the realtors and myself, and I would say, well, the Renegades didn't have a lobbyist yet, but maybe if the dues go up or get more sponsors, you get a seat at the table. Yes?
Just to put this all in perspective, what portion of the mortgage lending activity did seller finance represent before the gate closed?
So the question is, what market share were seller financing? Well, I think it's sort of another history lesson. When I started in 1988, there were a lot of land contracts around. It was really the only way to sell property in the 80s. When, think about qualifying for a mortgage when the best rate you can get is 19. And so but also there were assumable mortgages. So people could sell their house. You didn't have the depreciation. People could sell their house on land contract. It was really the only way they could. So there were a lot of wraparounds. Now, fast forward to the 90s and 2000s, when anybody that wanted to get a loan and you had a pulse or you could fog a mirror, you could get a mortgage. So there was very little seller financing going on in those days. So the fact that it wasn't a sizable market for a period of time wasn't directly proportional to the regulation. It just had to do with sellers want a bag of money and they could get it. Now you're seeing mortgages tough to get, so you're seeing more demand. You got people, maybe strategic defaulters are putting money in safe deposit box rather than in their bank account where their lender will see it. Want to go buy a house with a big down payment. I mean, don't lie, that's happening. Other people that may have gotten an A- loan before that are honest, hardworking people. There is no hard A- credit loans available. They want to buy on land contracts, so there is demand. If they want to buy from an owner-occupant, they can. That's still allowed under SAFE. Buying from an investor is severely restricted, but the market data I don't think is correlated with the regulation. But certainly the regulation now is going to further restrict when there is more demand. Biggest impediment to land contract sales now is somebody can't sell a land contract if they're upside down. But believe it or not, some of them do.
No, you can.
Yep.
You just got to cover the loan. You can't pay off the land contract before the actual mortgage. At least that's the way the law was written.
Well, if you you owe $120 on a house and you're selling it for $80 on land contract.
It depends. Okay, that $120's got to get paid off. If you've got a 4% loan and you're selling that 80 at 11%, amortization schedule. Anybody? Which one's going to pay off first?
You have
I take the
counterpoint to that. The
120.
counterpoint to that would be that if you're selling something, it's like selling if you owe $120 on a car and you're selling it for $80, what equity are you selling? You don't have a piece of the pie, would be the other argument. But I can see your point that if it is amortizing quicker, you can look on a spreadsheet that way.
Absolutely,
but you're selling thin air.
We'll sell it at 120.
Okay.
You owe 120 at 4%, sell it at 120 for 6%.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think you've got an issue there. If somebody wants to pay off that loan, which they have the right to do,
right.
You can't restrict someone from prepaying a loan in Michigan, as far as I know, on a consumer transaction. If you've got that extra 40 in the bank, I think you're safe. Otherwise, I think you're violating the Consumer Protection Act for an unfair and deceptive act against a consumer. Because if you've got to deliver clear title under that income. So if you've got you've got the ability to pay the difference, I think you're okay. Now this isn't part of the transaction, or part of the presentation.
I don't know why you would sell it at 80 if you owed 120 to begin with. I would sell it at 120 and raise the interest rate to 2%,
Okay.
whatever.
All right, but either way, let's move on. Any other questions dealing with the regulation? Okay. The SAFE Act, moving on with the seller financing restrictions under the SAFE Act, just as a review, HUD chose not to decide how frequently an individual may provide financing before reaching the requisite degree of habitualness. Now, with the Dodd-Frank Act, a lot of the regulations, truth in lending used to be regulated by the Federal Reserve Board. Most of that now moves to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Same thing with the SAFE Act. RESPA is now under CFPB. Equal Credit Opportunity Act is moving from FTC and the banking regulators over to CFPB. So you've got a transfer of authority. The dynamic to recognize there is many of the prior regulators, like HUD, is in the business of making and insurance loans too, making and insuring loans. So there's part of HUD. Some of the people that work for HUD are actually thinking about making loans, and and maybe a business hat may be on once. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, their whole mission is protecting consumers. So unlike the Federal Trade Commission that used to regulate some of these acts, where there's a balance between the industry need and the consumer need, the mission of the Bureau does not include listening to the business need. They do have an interest in the availability of credit, but by 99.9% of their mission is protecting consumers. So the SAFE Act authority and the new rules could come out from the CFPB, but the old rules are going to be enforced by CFPB instead of HUD now. The National Association of Realtors expects that the CFPB will defer to reasonable state laws on the number of seller financing transactions that would trigger licensing, but really only time will tell. We don't know. The CFPB has a full plate as far as the rules to the laws to write rules on, the regulations to write new rules on and finalize. I don't know where the SAFE Act falls in that, but they do have the authority to revisit that. Will there be new Michigan SAFE Act FAQs in 2013? We did talk about this a little bit. Hopefully they'll define the level of activity that does constitute being engaged in the business. That's the angle to ask for, is for them to define that, and they do have the authority to interpret it. There was the discussions between the working group of interested parties. On the state level, I can honestly say that the regulator does listen. They are a product of this administration, which seems to have their business ears on and looking at reducing regulation. Unfortunately, federal level is a whole nother story. Within the HUD rule, they talk about a seller having the ability to completely avoid the issue of licensure by retaining a licensed person to originate the loan or land contract for them. In 49 states, that may work. Unfortunately, in Michigan, the way the laws are written, it's impossible. The reason for that is pursuant to the First Mortgage Act, a mortgage loan originator can only provide services as an employer agent for one entity, their sponsor. So for example, I'm a mortgage loan originator. My sponsor is our mortgage company. So if I'm going to write a loan or a land contract in this instance, I can write it for my sponsor. If Todd were to call me and say, I want to sell a property on a land contract, will you originate it for me? I'd have to say thanks, but no thanks, because I can't do it. Now, one would think, okay, well, how about if I resign and become a free agent? Well, unfortunately, if you're a free agent, if you're unsponsored, you're locked out. You must have a sponsor in order to become licensed. They wanted to give you the rule. The OFER wanted to come up with the name temporarily suspended. Wait, how's that? Put that on your business card. Licensed but temporarily suspended. We were able to persuade them to come up with the words approved inactive for someone that doesn't have a sponsor. So a little better. So anyway, but the result is the same, whether you were the first draft said temporarily suspended, or the current version in the law approved inactive, unfortunately you cannot transact business if your sponsorship ceases. Now that is one of the FAQs. They had lawyers in the room, and of course, they can't make up things that are in the law already, but we're asking if this is true. Everybody I've talked to thinks it is. Jeff, I'll let you go first.
Do lawyers need to be licensed?
There is an exception for lawyers. The Michigan version of the law says, and I always pronounce this word improperly, but a lawyer can participate in the transaction as an ancillary activity. So in other words, if it's part of their practice of law, just part of their ordinary practice of law, meaning they're representing the sale, they can be involved in it. If it's something where somebody has a practice of law and effectively they're a mill, rent a lawyer, I think they're going to be in violation. Now, there is a question under the HUD rule whether the states or HUD can regulate the practice of law. There's some comments in there that say that the highest court of the land, U.S. Supreme Court, and the highest court of each state, as we're seeing by what happened yesterday, can regulate the practice of law within the state. However, usually, and you saw this yesterday, if a lawyer is violating ethics of profession or another law, if you read the disciplinary action that was published yesterday regarding Justice Hathaway, it refers to her as a licensed real estate broker and licensed attorney, and some of the things that she admitted to in her testimony. So I would think other lawyers would be subject to a law that's written, but if your lawyer feels good doing it and he's going to defend himself, fine. But it does have the word ancillary in it. Same question twice. Okay, go ahead.
I have a question though. Is Todd, and I like to pick on Todd, can he wear that second hat of being his own?
You can become licensed. Yeah,
Licensed as a loan.
Yeah, if you want it, it's a dual licensure though. If you think about it, you've got to become a mortgage loan originator, and then you've got to become a licensed mortgage lender as well. Now, there's someone in the room that can tell us how long that takes and how expensive it is.
Yeah, he's referring to my wife Brenda, who just went through a year becoming, she's starting a hard money fund, and the fund had to become a mortgage lender, and she also had to become a licensed mortgage loan originator. She started working on it in January, went through a phase where the state office told her she did not have to be licensed. She went back and said, I think I do, based on Allan's input to a certain extent. A month later, they came back and said, yep, you're right, here's the laws, you do have to. She went back and forth for the better part of the year, and in the beginning of December, the fund license was approved, but they won't start working on the individual license as a lender until the fund is approved, and they have to be legally linked in the system and everything. And then a few weeks later, she was able to receive the second licensing. So in the state's hands, it was 8 months. All in all, in the process, it was a year, plus the entity. I think you have to have $25,000.
25 for broker lender, 100,000 net worth for servicer.
That is
and then a bond.
Untouchable money that sits there and does not earn interest or anything. So additionally, when you start this process, you have to start a bank account and put 25 grand in there that will sit there forever and you can't touch, just to be able to hold that license.
What about a bond?
You've got there's a net worth requirement and a bond, and then the loan officer has to have a separate bond.
Both the entity and the originator both have to be separately bonded. We learned after back.
Right, but the requirement for the money to be in that account.
The money must be in the account.
Really?
Yeah,
you must show a bank statement.
Yeah, and then you're also subject to random audit. We've been it's not fun. It's like Well, I won't tell you what medical procedure it's like. We had one in July. I had an interesting July. Got back from vacation and had a 2-day offer audit with 2 examiners. Knock on wood, we came through it and no violations. They actually told my dad to give me a bonus. I'm still waiting on that. So that was Tuesday, Wednesday, and then on Friday I had 4 wisdom teeth pulled. And our next, the question was what was worse? Well, I did have sedation for one. But the benefit is this was the first audit we've had, and we've had at least 5 of them. We've never had a violation. So one would think, why did they come the last 4 times? But in any event, this was the first time we got advance notice. And it wasn't long. If I were going on vacation and I did send them my ticket, I also sent them my medical or my dental appointment confirmation, it would have been just a Friday to a Monday. So, I ended up spending the weekend in the office getting all our bank statements and everything scanned so they could do stuff off-site. And then she gave us a list of a couple dozen files they wanted to go through, sort of a forensic file. Todd, they didn't look at yours, but they do check, escrow analysis, crediting of payments, and plus every disclosure that was given, the timing of the release of lien or deed or discharge. So it's a very thorough exam. For those of you that are having funds or securities, I've got an attachment that I can show you their questionnaire, and at the bottom of it, they probably weren't. Should I say, this is on TV. Anyway, it said, is there an indicator to send this to the Securities Bureau for possible further examination? So apparently in the email attachment, I had some of their internal stuff, but now they know. But meanwhile, it's about a 67 question questionnaire that we had to fill out, and a couple of days in there going through a lot of files, and we survived. But if you're thinking of getting licensed, it's going to cost you a lot. It's going to cost a lot of time, credit report classes, testing, bonding, criminal background check, fingerprinting. And but if you see that it's worthwhile, after this presentation, let me know.
State and federal tests. And everything. But by the way, 11 months into that process, the same woman who had been processing all along said, "Well, I've turned everything over to my supervisor, but he doesn't think you have to be licensed by us anyway." And she sent back the same information they sent her and said, "Well, this is the laws that you quoted to me." And 2 days later, she was approved.
Okay.
And then she went for the individual license. But it was a grueling process.
It's a long process. And if you think about it, this stuff is very confusing. We have a lot of skin in the game, and I've been studying this a long, long time. And if you're working in Lansing for the department, you study other things too. They're responsible for a lot of other laws in the department. They're not. I know a lot of these people. They're very hardworking. A lot of them have been there a long time. Some of them have taken early retirement. There are some new people, but they are, especially compared to some of the, stereotypes. I think there's a lot of dedicated people there, but it's very hard to interpret this stuff. The state people are almost as confused by the federal regulation as we are, and they'll say it to you because the federal stuff is BS.
And the other part is they're used to dealing with conventional lenders. And so one question that went on for 3 months was, who are you going to sell the loans to? And she kept saying, I'm not going to sell the loans. And then they'd ask again and so on. And she finally told the woman, look, I'll give you the name of 3 banks if you want it, but I'm not going to sell the loans. And they finally stopped asking after that.
Yeah.
But they're not, this is kind of a niche that isn't their mainstream business.
Well, right. Yeah, there's a square peg in a square hole, and then you're asking for an exception, which would be whether it be private lending or land contract licensure. There has not been a lot of focus on this over the years. I can tell you that some of the definitional things, there's people in Lansing that weren't aware of this, and a lot of people out in the street too. But if you think about it, with their main job and focus in the early 2000s was fighting fraud and doing examinations. Now, if you look at, they came out to audit us, and we're not a big player as far as number of loans compared to Chase Bank or Quicken or people like that. But the reason is they're doing routine exams now. They're hitting everybody under every 3 years because they work very hard to get full-time employees. It's not just a budget issue. It's you know, an issue to get permission to hire people. They got permission when the fraud was going on. If they reassign people, they won't get them back. So they're doing routine exams, and they're also looking at unlicensed activity now, where that wasn't going on before because they had bigger fish to fry. Moving on to Dodd-Frank Act, and I've got a little nickname for the congressman from Massachusetts, but in any event, when do the rules go into effect? According to the Dodd-Frank Act, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has until January 21st of this month to issue final Title 14 regulations, which must take effect once they're issued no later than 12 months later. So assuming they meet the deadline, which is the 21st of this month, the final rule will go into effect by early 2014, or they can issue a rule that has immediate effect. If they don't issue if they miss the deadline, and bear in mind they've got other things that they have on the radar screen, then the law goes hard January 21st with no implementing regulation, meaning that the courts are going to decide most of it. So you know, the devil you know, the devil you don't know, it's the devil. A little more on that. Now, I talked about, you know, the SAFE Act, and then, you know, learning that and the threshold and why it might not be important. These are the provisions in the law, Dodd-Frank, and the regulation is going to implement these provisions. Section 129C provides that no creditor may make a residential mortgage loan, and bear in mind land contract is equivalent consensual security interest under that definition under truth in lending. So no, you cannot make a residential mortgage loan without first making a reasonable and good faith determination that the borrower has the ability to repay. Now, whether you have a Windows phone, an Android, or an iPhone, tell me where I can download that Crystal Ball app that I can make a determination for the future. Determination, just dictionary, the process of establishing something exactly by calculation or research. It does not say projection, it does not say underwrite to the. Now, they're in the rule, maybe they'll define it differently than the dictionary, but it has the word in the law. The Dodd-Frank Act definition of mortgage originator, now you're looking for a number, exempts an individual or estate or trust that provides mortgage financing for no more than 3 properties in any 12-month period, does not say calendar year, so it's rolling, from certain requirements of Title 14, that's the mortgage section, but only if the financing meets certain criteria. So under Dodd-Frank, your number is going to be 3, and it's only if the loan or the land contract meets certain criteria. What are they? The seller did not construct the home to which the financing being applied. This is the law. This is not a proposed rule, this is in the law. Now, construct, does that mean reconstruct? Is a rehabber covered? I don't know. Do you want to be the test case? I don't. The loan is fully amortizing, no balloon payments. The seller determines in good faith and documents that the buyer has a reasonable ability to repay the loan. What does that mean? We're determined. The loan has a fixed rate or is adjustable only after 5 or more years, subject to reasonable, whatever that is, annual and lifetime caps. Does that mean reasonable compared to bank rates that are 3.9? The loan meets other criteria set by the Federal Reserve Board. The Federal Reserve Board, since 1930s, regulates banks, mortgage lenders' license, regulates sellers now. And of course, their criteria hasn't been set. Will it be retroactive once it's set? If you want to Google something, you can, some of these questions and comments to the CFPB when the rule was in its comment period were made by the National Association of Realtors. That comment letter is public. I really don't know whether the CFPB is going to pay much attention to it or not. There's a lot of stuff coming from a lot of consumer groups that say that the law isn't protective enough. The penalties. There's a harsh liability for violation of the ability to repay requirement. The damages include all of the following: actual damages, twice the finance charge. Now, if you wrote a 10-year loan, that would be all the interest, not just the part. So if you ever look at a truth in lending statement, it says 30 years, what that interest is going to be. That's it, twice that. All fees the consumer paid, plus costs and attorney fees. And that's not all. Consumers may assert ability to pay violations as a defense in a foreclosure action or for land contract forfeiture with no statute of limitation. Meaning anytime they default, you send them a notice, you go to court, their lawyer's going to be on the radio, do you want extra time? Call me. They can do it time and again. You have to defend yourself, prove yourself innocent to a jury of their peers that you determine the ability to pay, and that jury may not know what DTI stands for. And if you're lucky enough to win, then you get to go ahead with your forfeiture or foreclosure, and then they can declare bankruptcy, wreck the house, get the redemption period, everything else. If they cure it and reinstate, they can do it again. If you lose, you cannot enforce your lien. You have the equivalent of a judgment lien or an IRS lien, meaning that when they refinance, you'll get paid. When they sell it, you'll get paid. If they don't do either, you won't get paid, but if you want to protect your lien, you better pay the taxes and keep it insured. These damages, of course, are likely to exceed the profit if they win. Enhanced damages for ability to pay violations provide consumers and their counsel with a strong arsenal, I just went over an example, to delay foreclosure and obtain substantial compensation by even threatening litigation. You want to get us out? Cash for keys. What is it normally? A couple $100? Move the decimal point. Any consumer who wishes to delay a foreclosure who wishes compensation regardless of the merits has an incentive to raise ability to pay allegations. It might constitute malpractice for an attorney representing a consumer not to at least attempt to bring such a claim. Fiduciary duty for the attorney. Why didn't he do it? Because he's a nice guy, he's a businessman, he disagrees with the law. Well, he's going to get sued. Yes?
Is the timetable of this ability to pay, does that align with, remember how earlier you said that you had to establish an ability to pay before you even went into a loan agreement? Or is it at time of now they're in trouble?
You have to do it, but okay, so you have to do it to make the loan. Okay, so do it to make the loan to be in compliance. Okay, so otherwise you're subject to, remember you're licensed if you should have been licensed under the definition. So, okay, so, they can come in, write you up, fine you, take away your license that you don't have, put you in jail, whatever. Okay, now on a business level, the consumer doesn't pay, and maybe you did a good job in verified. I had a meeting that I can tell you about if we have time after. I had a very expensive compliance attorney and a just as expensive transactional attorney. I had the deal killer, the deal maker, talking about, will we be able to do this? At the end, I raised the right white flag, but the reasoning is, even if you're right, they can say you're wrong, and you've got to prove yourself right. And you can't really compute your risk. Your compliance risk is, I can't do it anymore. You'd have to be at like 1% loan to value and charge 2 million % interest to make this worthwhile.
But the reason I bring this up is because today, for instance, when we do short sales, it always ends up being an ability to pay conversation, but that's always after the loan was originated. So is that a moving target? Because obviously your ability to pay is a variable. Maybe you're injured, maybe your spouse goes away, whatever, maybe you get fired.
The regulation talks about determination, which again, how can you determine some future events, and then in some of the other language it talks about based on current and expected income and obligations. Do I have time for an example, Jeremy?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The example I raised in a meeting with the compliance attorney and the transactional attorney, I said, if we stay in serving the consumer market, let's say I've got a bulletproof example, and here's what it is. I've got a borrower, or could be a buyer. In this case, it was a borrower example. that needs to borrow money to pay property taxes. They're going to lose their house in just a matter of time for failure to pay property taxes. The government didn't ask them their ability to pay when they assessed those taxes, and they're going to take their house. But, so it's a need, it's not a want. They have to pay their taxes. The reason they didn't pay it is because they were in an argument with Blue Cross that wouldn't cover chemotherapy for one of the spouses. So they had their income, but they used it to pay the medical bills rather than the property taxes. They're showing me verifiable income. What is it? It's a government pension that's not going to go out of business. They won the lotto and they chose not to take the one-time discounted payoff, and they got money coming over time. Remember, I'm making this up. They've also had a wrongful death injury to a child, and they have an annuity from an insurance company, a AAA rated plus whatever, that gives them lump sum and then a $1 million buyout in 3 years, and they can always sell that to Peachtree and get the money now, I suppose. But in any event, it's bulletproof. They have no other debt. Their cars are paid for. They have no second mortgage, no other house. They live frugally. I asked the compliance attorney, I said, are you telling me that if they don't pay me in the future, they could say that I should have looked at the life expectancy of their vehicle to know when they would need 4 new tires, when they'd have to buy a new car or lease a new car and have a car payment, when they would need a new furnace, a new roof? And without hesitation, the compliance attorney said, if I were their attorney, I would say you should have done that. It's my duty. And I looked at the transactional attorney, the deal maker, and said, is this guy full of it? And he said, I have to agree with them, and here's why. There is no case law and there is no regulation, and you don't want to be the test case. Now, maybe when there's, he went on to say, maybe in 2-3 years when there's regulation and case law, you'll step back in. But that was the most far-fetched, ludicrous example. I had a deal similar to like that, and they did default, but they redeemed. But that was the example I thought of. So if you can tell me you feel comfortable being in that market, there's room, I'm out. You have less competition. Okay, so here we are talking about penalties and the duty of a lawyer to be a fiduciary for a consumer defendant. It gets worse. There's an appropriation under Dodd-Frank for funding for foreclosure defense. Your money, my money, is going to train attorneys and to give money, grants to legal aid to fight you. They're going to get the training. You pay $25 for yours, but they're going to get legal training. That's the title of the presentation. It is hardcore. I think that it's going to impact it, whether it will die or a slow death, a quick death. There is a need for this product. Unfortunately, the pendulum has swung. Some would argue that it was too loose before. It swung the other way now. Hopefully in my lifetime it will come back. I don't know. We talked about technicalities and so forth, starting with the robo-signing example. We can talk a little bit about enforcement. We can answer any other questions. I think where you're going to see enforcement is, I call them cowboys. I won't call them renegades purposely. But there's cowboys out there where, there has been a law since 1987 about 10 transactions, and that's been ignored. I think there's entities that are buying hundreds of REOs, foreclosed properties, and selling them on a land contract without licensure. I see a lot of enforcement coming on people that might have done 11 when there's people out there that have done 100. So you've got cowboys and the innocents or the ignorance, rather than the game we used to play, the politically incorrect cowboys and something else when we were kids. So you've got 2 different type targets. I think there will be some highly publicized enforcement actions. Someone is going to be the penalized party because they're going to make an example out of someone and say, this is the new law. There's a new sheriff in town. It's the CFPB. I don't want to be that person. We've followed the rules. I don't think I would have been appointed to the board if I didn't pass all those background checks. But I studied this a lot. Unfortunately, I'm scared to death. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Well, I hope you lived through it. Thank you. Gary.
One last question. Allan's done a fantastic job. Super guy. Most of you all know Allan. Know that he's very thorough. But quick question for you. If you're confronted with a forfeiture on a land contract, would you advise or would you think it would be a reasonable course of action just to simply allow the buyer to have the property as opposed to go through this melees of problems or challenges?
Well, looking at the
Depending on what your
future,
position is.
looking at the future, or looking at an existing contract that's
Yeah.
okay, an existing contract.
Existing contract.
Okay, so the question is, if there's a somebody defaults on an existing land contract that was originated prior to the enactment date or the hard date of the regulation. I think a court or I don't know if there's retroactive effect on some of this. I mean, one could argue, how would you if there was not a duty to underwrite income on a land contract in 1990 that was written as a 25-year land contract, and they default now and assert this defense, would a judge, well, first of all, would the district court judge even know Dodd-Frank, but if their attorney brings it up, would it be something that would be at play? I don't have the answer to that. I'm more concerned going forward. I think you may have a foundation to stand on, some solid ground on the things that were done in the past, unless you did 30 land contracts and weren't licensed at the time. I think the buyers have a lot of tools, and they've learned from this robo-signing thing. My dad, when he did dentistry, used to joke that they might not have paid for their dentures, but the consumer will pay for their house. I think it's the other way around now. The house is the last thing they pay for. They'll pay for their dentures or something else because they know they've got a lot of time. They've got an educated consumer. So I'm sorry I don't have anything but long wind with for that. Next question, Todd.
Does this apply to cases where you're selling to another investor as well, or is it just for owner-occupants?
Great question. Most of the regulations in truth in lending define are covered consumer purpose transactions. The abbreviated definition of a consumer purpose transaction is where the purpose is for the primary purpose is personal, family, or household use. So certainly, and I use the word consumer in this, so certainly dealing with a primary residence or a vacation home or a transaction to a consumer. There's usually a two-pronged test with that. It would be the occupancy and the use of the funds. Now, bear in mind with regulations and laws like this, unlike criminal type thing where it's beyond a reasonable doubt. In this case, the duty is to, the duty is to demonstrate compliance was the word I was looking for. So, like for example, during our audit, we have to demonstrate to the examiner that we complied with all this. So if I have a sale of a property, and some people have seen our stack of documents when we sell a property to an investor or a landlord, a lot of that, the reason is I have to demonstrate to my examiner that that investor, first of all, that they're not going to live there, also that it's not a sham, that they have experience, that they are engaged in that business, because I have to prove it. And so the answer to your question is the coverage is consumer transactions, but don't think that you can just put a label on something. We had a transaction where an applicant applied for a loan on a rental property. There was a lease. He had other rentals. We got the title work, and it was homesteaded. Now, obviously that's 18 mills, and there might be a reason to look the other way if something didn't get filed. On the other hand, I saw it. And I have to be able to verify that that's not owner-occupied, and something that's homesteaded would be, certainly a red flag to an examiner, and for someone that wants to demonstrate compliance, it meant the file didn't go further. Yes?
Have you seen anything at all in the regulations that pertains to the buying and selling of paper that's been originated already?
There is since 1994, part of the Truth in Lending Act is the Home Ownership Equity Protection Act, HOPA. It's Section 32 of the Truth in Lending Act. It's dealing with high-cost loans. It's the first time that assignee liability is mentioned in the Truth in Lending Act. Most of the time, the originator would be liable for violations of the Truth in Lending Act. With the High Cost Act, there is assignee liability. The assignment, there's supposed to be a disclosure to the assignee for a high cost loan that it is subject to provisions of the Truth in Lending Act, special provisions. HOPA, Section 32, is now on steroids with the Dodd-Frank Act. So there is some precedent for assignee liability as to buyers and sellers of paper per se. I can say that we buy paper. Part of my checklist now is to look at the seller under the SAFE Act. If something was pre-SAFE Act, I'm a lot less worried. Post-SAFE Act, I'm going to look at the occupancy of the seller. Did they live there? Did they claim a homestead when they sold it? Something afterwards sold by investor, I'm going to look at their level of activity. How can I do that? Well, Real Comp is pretty easy. There's a lot of public record as to how many transactions they sold. If it's a onesies and twosies, I might buy that paper. If it's someone that is engaged and I don't know whether they were licensed, maybe it's a reason for a bigger discount. Or do you want, remember the word toxic assets, and with TARP, you can look at those types of things now.
On paper, basically just over that issue?
It's a gray area on it. I'm just saying there is a precedent for buying paper that may be non-compliant, that the assignee could be liable. Certainly, if you're going to try to foreclose on it, if you got to buy. There's not a safe harbor from any sort of claims that the buyer may have. Chris?
Is there an exemption for sales to immediate family?
In the Michigan Loan Officer Licensing Act, there is an exemption, which is the State Safe Act for sales to an immediate family member. That language is not in Dodd-Frank. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, in the final rule, they do have a lot of latitude to even insert things that weren't written in the law. An example for a regulator inserting things that aren't in the law are in RESPA. If you look at a good faith estimate, Congress put in the word estimate, but in 2010 RESPA was changed that the estimate's no longer an estimate, it's a hard type thing, and if the estimate's no good, the lender has to cure the tolerance. So there's precedent for the regulator changing things and inserting things. So in this case, it may open up something where you can sell to a relative.
But if there was a balloon in that, then that might kick back on the Dodd-Frank.
I'm having trouble hearing.
If there was a balloon involved, if there was a balloon.
A balloon?
Yeah, because in the Dodd-Frank, that's one of those criteria. It's up to 3
if there's no balloon, if it's fully amortizing. Yeah, so I don't think that says unless that person's related. Now will there be, first of all, is your family member going to assert an ability to pay defense? Who knows? Some of the worst ones you see.
Another lawyer.
Depends if it's a soon-to-be ex-wife. No. Mr. Carey.
Yeah, all of these defenses and other issues will apply not only to small-time investors who are selling 8 or 10 houses a year under a land contract, but they would also apply to the large lenders, the Chases, the Bank of America, and so forth. Is that part of why?
Well, yeah. Well, let me elaborate on something that really. The question is a good one, and I'm sure Dave has been following this as well. A seller finance transaction would not meet the definition of a QM or a qualified mortgage. A qualified mortgage is yet to be defined, but it's going to be defined, I bet money on it, as a vanilla mortgage. It's going to be FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, VA loans, a conforming product where the interest rate is going to, right now would be 3 to 4%, and the costs are no more than 3%. There's debate right now whether a qualified whether the 3% fees include escrows, which is crazy. How could it include escrows? Well, give it to the government. But in any event, if you're a qualified mortgage, meaning that vanilla product, the ability to pay, there's less of a worry. Now, even then, the Chases, the BOAs, the Countrywide gone, the Quickens, whichever, are worried because there's a debate going on whether that will be a safe harbor or a rebuttable presumption. Now, those are legal terms, but the lenders are hoping and praying and commenting and lobbying very hard, and it'll come out probably this week, the rule for qualified mortgage. They're hoping for a safe harbor, meaning that if they did A through Z or A through triple Z or whatever these underwriting criteria now are for those of you that have done a recent conforming loan application, but if they've met all that and you've given tax returns since the year one, that you're safe. The consumer groups say, well, you're presumed safe, but we can rebut it. In other words, we can sue you, but it's a different level of proof rather than the proof where you've got to prove yourself innocent. In this case, the consumer's got to win. So that dynamic is going on. So the answer to your question is it's not the same, but that's the reason why you're seeing no A- or any type of subprime or non-conforming, is because unless it's a qualified mortgage in this very, very narrow or small square peg and square hole, it's going to be outside the box and you're going to have the ability to pay. But even inside the box, there's a lot of stuff going on within the beltway. I'd like to own a restaurant or bar and get wined and dined. Jeremy.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
So how is this going to differ? Our only other alternative to do lease options?
Lease option. I could go back into some slides. A lot of people are doing seminars now on lease options. Now, I go back personally the term other equivalent consensual security interest. Now, if a lot of lease options I've seen, and I've seen a few, look like land contracts except for the top thing at the top that says lease option. Some of it you can see the whiteout. Now with the word processor, it's not quite the same as it used to be. But I think they're going to look, and you look at the 1950s language from the Supreme Court, or even the 1970s appeals court decision when they talk about deeds and foreign versus substance. I think the devil is going to be in the details. And if you look at commercial transactions like the Chrysler headquarters, they sold that and leased it back. Well, it's very common in commercial transaction. It's actually listed as a form of financing, a sale lease back, because for tax reasons or whatever, they'll sell it and then they can write off the entire rent as an expense rather than just the interest portion for financing. But it's financing. It's that stuff's sold, secondary market and everything. So that's what the consumer lawyer. I'm not even a lawyer, but maybe a lawyer would hire somebody like me to tell a court that you're wrong and they're right. So unless you find an expert or a lawyer that can win your side and you're willing to spend the money, I don't know if a lease option is a safe harbor. If there's other people that would disagree, and there is a First Amendment, so we'll let them disagree. And some of this we don't know yet, but I see a court case coming on that.
That was my question.
Okay.
Nobody had asked it yet, so I was waiting to the end.
Yeah, no, and it's a good one.
It's like the obvious
Yeah.
question.
Hey, in the beginning you mentioned you used the term, I think, engaged in, and you said there's a gray area whether you're the buyer or the seller of seller financing. So if I'm buying properties from individual owner occupants and they're seller financing those to me, and I'm doing more than 3 transactions a year, I have to abide by these guidelines.
I think as far as real estate license law, you could, depending on whether there's a real estate broker involved, there may be an issue in the number of transactions, the times you're spending. But you're not the provider of financing. In this instance, you're the receiver of the financing. So I can't think of any court or regulator that would say that the borrower in a transaction would ever be considered engaged. I mean, what they're talking about is engaged in the business of loan origination. So originating, not receiving. Good question. I'm sorry if I implied differently. Yes?
You might
might have covered this earlier, but if a licensed realtor is part of an LLC and they do multiple land contracts and they get audited or somebody comes to them and they say, no, somebody in our group is a licensed realtor and they can do this, would that violate it because that licensed realtor is also part of whatever brokerage?
Well, you've got the realtor, you've got different layers of licensing. The realtor is licensed under the occupational code for buying, selling real estate and so forth. But the land contract, there's different layers of licensing. That's Mortgage Broker Lender Servicers Licensing Act, so they need a different license, and then the Mortgage Loan Originator Licensing Act. So that realtor, and I happen to know a realtor that's got all these licenses, but that realtor would need to have all those licenses on their wall. Now the MLOLA license is just in cyberspace. They don't issue a certificate for that. But the realtor would need those licenses, and but they'd have to disclose that, and they'd have to comply with all the provisions.
And do you think that they're about to, start doing deed searches and title searches to see how many people are actually doing land contracts without the knowledge? There's a ton of people we know doing land contracts. They don't know anything about this. Me being one of them.
Okay.
And so, do you think that this is going to just go forward, or I know you had said something about the retro, or are they really just going to start targeting a bunch of people?
I think if you've done more than 10 transactions, and if you're servicing more than 10 land contracts now, very clear in the 25, 26-year-old law that you should be licensed under that act. Now you can engage another servicer to service the land contracts, and actually there is a provision for a real estate broker to service some, depending on if there's escrows or not, and that's sort of minutia in the law. Well, it's very specific stuff that's probably not for the whole audience, without putting everybody to sleep. But do I think, what level of enforcement? People that, okay, when I started in, think dark ages, 1989 is when our license paperwork, and it was all paper at that time, went through for the Mortgage Broker Licensing Act. Now the person that's the director of licensing now was there then. He was the first person I talked to at what was called the Financial Institutions Bureau. And he knew all about me when I called. He knew I had an insurance license, he knew I was licensed under the occupational code, and this was pre-Google. So things are a lot easier to search now. They used to look in the yellow pages for mortgage companies to see who was a mortgage company after 1987 to see who should be licensed. Look at the Pennsylvania example where you've got licensed people that are paying the freight and dealing with all the stuff they have to go through. I think that people that are unlicensed are probably going to get turned in by people that are licensed that are sort of jealous. You're going to have consumers turn you in. Lawyers are going to turn you in. The consumers are going to do it because they're going to think they're going to get out of their debt on a technicality. Now, will the state people do it? I don't know if they're going to give bonuses for them doing, work, and they're very busy and they're understaffed. But it's probably within their job description to look for things, and it's pretty easy to do at a desk.